Good morning. I want to welcome everyone here. So I want to give a little context to why we're here today before we jump into the legislation or proposed legislation we're here to talk about. We're a few weeks past the passage of a 2021-2022 state budget that is now larger than Texas and Florida combined, that increased taxes by $4.3 billion. And what we heard from our colleagues across the aisle was that, well, this tax is only on the ultra wealthy, right? So who cares about them? They can pay more. We're not taxing anybody else. Even though the governor removed the middle class or middle income tax cut, which, thanks to the efforts of the people behind me, ultimately was restored by the majority in the final budget. But today, on the heels of that, on the heels of this argument that we're only taxing the ultra wealthy to pay their fair share, now we have a bill, the Climate and Community Investment Act, which is sponsored by Senator Parker in the Senate, as well as Assemblyman Cahill. There was just a public hearing on this bill. This is a priority piece of legislation by the majority. There were 23 co-sponsors, and it would include a carbon tax of $55 per ton of fossil fuel emissions in order to reach renewable energy mandates laid out in last year's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Currently, New York's gas tax is the 7th highest in the nation at 43.12 cents per gallon, with California currently the highest at 62.47 cents per gallon. This legislation will raise New York's gas tax to 98.12 cents per gallon, an increase of more than 127%, and it would make New York's gas tax more than 50% higher than any other state. In New York, approximately 85% of households are heated with fossil fuels, 60% utility, 20% fuel oil, and 4% propane. Now, the money from this tax would go to a third would go to low and moderate income families, a third to environmental justice communities, and a third to green energy projects. Now, I raise that because the original gas tax was always about infrastructure. That was what was used to fund highway improvements, to fund infrastructure improvements for the people who traveled on the roads, filling up their car at the pump. This makes no bones. It's not going to infrastructure. This is being driven by the fact that we passed a bill which laid out mandates and goals that were aspirational, that we didn't know how we were going to get there, which is a bad way to legislate. It's a bad way to govern. But more importantly, we're going to put forward this bill at a time when, since 1990, and this is from the Consumer Energy Alliance, New York's emissions have fallen by as much as 95%. And I say that because no one here, no one behind me, and certainly not me, is sitting here saying the alternative is to let the environment go to hell. My colleagues across the aisle would have you believe that everything is a binary choice. You're either for increasing the gas tax by 55 cents per gallon, or you don't care about the environment. And that is simply a false premise. That is not true. You can care about the environment. You can do things to incentivize better behavior from our corporate partners, from our citizens. You can do things, and we have done things, because again, our carbon emissions have fallen by 95% since 1990. And yet, even still, that apparently is not enough. We have to put forward a piece of legislation which is, and this is not a tax on the wealthy. I drive a car. Everyone up here, our constituents, my constituents, drive cars so they can get to their jobs, so they can drop their kid off at daycare, so they can drop their kid off at school, so they can go to their second job, if it's still open, if they can still find it. And now you're going to increase their tax 55 cents per gallon. You're going to increase the cost for them to heat their homes in the winters in the North Country, where Senator Steck lives, in Western New York, Long Island. Doesn't matter where you live. New York is a cold state and you need to heat your home in the wintertime. This is going to increase that by 26%. This is easily one of the most myopic pieces of legislation that have come out of that conference in a long time. In the middle of a pandemic, we're talking about raising taxes on regular New Yorkers, millions of them, who take cars to get to work. 55 cents a gallon, 26% to heat their homes. This is a bad piece of legislation, and it is based on this false premise that the only way to protect the earth is to increase taxes, increase mandates, drive more people out of New York State. Just yesterday, we learned that we were losing a congressional seat as a result of the latest census. And I only bring that up because I know there are some folks on the other side of the aisle who would have you believe that the fact that we didn't lose 2 is somehow a victory, that we only lost 1 seat, right? Oh, thank God, we only lost 2, we didn't lose 2. We must be doing something right. We lost a seat. We lost representation in Washington, D.C. And why did we lose that? Because we're losing population. We've had years where we've had net losses, and we're losing that population compared to other states. We're not growing at the same rate. Why is that? It's because of pieces of legislation like this, right here, plain and New York simple.